Hi, my name is Aaron.
And this is Matthew. And this training video is going to focus on the style of beer called the Trappist Quadrupel, or Trappist Quad as it's commonly referred to. Now this style of beer is the largest or biggest beer that most of the beer producing abbeys produce. The Quad is always a dark beer, okay? It's made with a ton of malt, has a very high ABV as a byproduct of that. Most of the alcohol in these beers is going to hover really between about 11 and 13%. Now this particular beer is from the Belgian Trappist brewery Roquefort. Aaron, tell us about it.
Yeah, that's right. This particular beer is the Roquefort 10. It's from Belgium. It's another one of the Belgian Trappist breweries, and it's one of 3 beers that they brew, all available with pretty good distribution throughout the entire United States. The way that Roquefort names their beers, other than single or double or triple, is they have numbers. So they have a 6, an 8, and a 10. Now, the way that they do it, it's not a single, it's not a double. It's the same, exactly the same recipe, with different amounts of malt. Everything else is the same. So all they're doing is really going more for the higher ABV. Now with doing that, when you get to beers like this, ABV is really essentially part of the recipe itself. So they're not just brewing it to a higher ABV for the sake of it being a more boozy tasting drink. It really, the higher ABV helps to smooth out the palate, bring up more flavors, bring a different dimension to the beers that aren't in the 6 and the 8. Having said that, I've had all 3 beers. All 3 are wonderful. Everyone has a different opinion of which one they like the most. My opinion, though, is this one's outstanding. It's an outstanding beer.
Yeah, I absolutely concur.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and pop it. Also, it's also known as Roquefort the blue cap, because the cap on the 10s are blue. They also say 10 on them. And then there's also a green cap and a red cap.
Yes.
The green cap, I believe, is the 6, and the red cap is the 8.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to pour this. This beer has been sitting out for about 10 minutes just to bring it up so it's not quite fridge temperature, because you want to make sure that you're serving this at a little bit of a warmer temperature to release all those wonderful flavors and aromas. And pouring this beer, you could just see right away that this is a beautifully well-made, well-crafted beer.
Yep. And we're going to go ahead and pour this into our Trappist-style chalices. Okay. If you don't have these available at your brass tap, serving it into a brass tap branded snifter is absolutely appropriate as well. Let's take a look at this one, Aaron. What do we got?
All right. Now, quads can range. There's a pretty various color range for them. Sometimes they can look exactly like a Belgian Trappist double would, or sometimes they can be really, really dark. This one is definitely on the darker side. For comparison, I believe the Chimay Blue is quite a few shades lighter than this one.
Yeah, this one's got a very deep mahogany color. It's not completely brown. There are some tinges of red to it. It almost reminds me kind of like a cola or a root beer type of a coloring. And then at the bottom of the glass, where it's not quite as wide, I do get a little bit of the light from behind it. It's kind of coming in at
just a little, yeah.
Almost touches of there's a little bit of like a burnt umber, slightly toasted orange. It's really a good looking beer, but obviously it's very hazy, which is absolutely typical for Trappist style ales in general, not just the quad, but also doubles and triples as well. That's because of the suspended yeast. These beers are all bottle conditioned, which means they have live brewer's yeast added to the bottle, along with, generally speaking, a little bit of priming sugar as well, which creates a secondary fermentation in the bottle, keeping the beer alive and keeping it developing throughout its entire lifespan.
Yeah, actually I poured a little bit of the yeast on the top of mine, and this one is actually kind of a darker looking yeast. It almost looks like you sprinkled nutmeg or cinnamon on the top
like
of the
cocoa
beer.
Powder.
Yeah, it's really, really cool looking. All right, so we're going to see how it smells. It's a really a wonderful smell. It's a very deep, rich.
There's plum. There's
raisins. I'm getting a lot of raisins.
Raisin, plum, like a brown sugar, Belgian candy sugar. Just a touch of chocolate too, like a milk chocolate. It's mostly fruit, mostly dark dried fruit. There's some spice to it, which is inherent in the yeast strain that's used in this. You get a little bit of a little bit of clove and.
Am I smelling? I pick up maybe just a hint of creaminess, maybe even vanilla.
Yeah, I was actually just about to say
and
vanilla.
That's not typical of the style, but it's really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is definitely a moderate sweetness, and I think vanilla may be it, or maybe like a raw vanilla bean.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm gonna taste it. Cheers.
Cheers.
Sorry, I didn't.
Yes,
Sorry, cheers.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
If you're gonna do it right.
Well, yeah. What a wonderful mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all these rich, ripe flavors of big fruit, plum, prune, raisin, a little, maybe just a tiny bit of licorice, a little bit of molasses and brown sugar. It's all really well developed inside. Kind of, despite the color of it, it's kind of more of a medium to medium full with really lively carbonation. That carbonation does a really good job of keeping the beer lighter than it probably should be on the palate. Really, really interesting combination.
Yeah, and at 11.2% ABV, I'm not sure if we went over that, but I'm sorry, 11.3% ABV. You really don't taste the alcohol, but you can feel it a little bit. So you get a little bit of this warming sensation that comes up many, many moments after even the hang. But it's definitely integrated within the recipe and the flavor of the beer. It's not a byproduct of the beer, which is a very important distinction when you're talking about really, really good beers to really, really great beers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely designed to be there as this mild warming presence. It's like Aaron said, it's absolutely well integrated, and it's part of the style characteristics.
So, what kind of beer drinker is this appropriate for? Well, this is going to be a little bit for your more advanced beer drinkers. It is a big beer, and there's a lot to appreciate and think about too. It's not one of those beers that's just kind of a mindless, drink it while you're watching the football game type of beer. It really deserves some attention being paid to it.
Absolutely. It's a beer for people that really appreciate subtlety, nuance, and craftsmanship in their beer. It's and also the price point on this is usually relatively high, which means that the people that are going to buy it are usually going to enjoy it and savor it for really the delicious product that it is.
And as far as I know, bottle only. I've never seen this beer in any of its iterations on draft anywhere.
At least not the United States.
Not in the United States. Maybe in Europe, that's a different story. But so bottles, you got to stick with bottles for this. Like I said, the 6, the 8, and the 10 are all pretty readily available if you know where to look.
And this beer in particular is really considered, widely considered to be one of the 2 or 3 best representations of the style in the entire world.
Yeah, we don't talk a whole lot about ratings on things like Rate Beer, Beer Advocate. There's such a wide range of ratings. We don't really talk about
a lot of variables that go into that sort of thing.
I will say this one though does have a 100 on Beer Advocate.
Sure, and that's
deserved.
Absolutely well deserved.
And it's not hype or anything like
sure,
that.
People in the know really can appreciate this beer for what it is. Its historical context, its consistency, and then just the extremely high level of quality of this beer is really very impressive.
Yeah, and excuse me, from personal experience, having had this beer quite often, it's really nice to see how the beer changes as it warms up. You don't want to serve it ice cold like we had said before, but even if it's below the recommended serving temperature, that's okay. But as it warms up, as you're drinking it, it really, really opens up. And even if when you're within that target temperature, there's still different flavors. Almost each sip is a little bit of a different flavor. And Matthew said earlier, because of the nice carbonation like this isn't easy to produce at 11.3%.
Absolutely.
I promise. But that high carbonation aids in the drinkability has those nice little magic scrubbing bubbles on your tongue that kind of cleanses the palate as it goes towards the back of your throat too.
Absolutely. And for people that enjoy keeping beers or collecting beers or cellaring beers, this is one of the most popular beers to set aside for a number of years. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, these have a shelf life of approximately 5 years.
Well, this one says best before end of October of 2018. And given the right storage conditions, I'm assuming you could probably keep it
Could last
years,
much longer than that.
years beyond that. I've actually had a 28-year-old version of a Roquefort 10, and it was great. One of the best beers I've ever had. And that's what we were talking about earlier about the oxidation becoming part of the recipe. I think it was the Russian Imperial Stout episode, and that's one of the predominant flavors when you're talking about aged Trappist beers too. That oxidation was fit in perfectly with that beer.
And, maybe it's just, a divine intervention, if you will, but you really have to have the patience of a monk to age this beer and not drink it.
Yeah.
On that note, gentlemen.
On that note,
Cheers.
cheers.